Okay, there we go. Okay, so everybody can hear me in the conference room.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. We're excited to have you here today for our webinar on strategic planning going into the new year. We're looking forward to a great program. And today, as you are obviously aware at this point, we are hybrid. So we have some guests in person at our conference room in Odenton and some on Zoom. So if you have any questions throughout the program for the folks on Zoom, you can feel free to add them in the chat box. For those in person, you can raise your hand, of course, and we will also have time at the end of the program for Q&A, so you're welcome to hold your questions as well. And without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our speaker for today's presentation. Lee Crumball has been working with organizations on strategy since 1988. He became enamored with strategy in his MBA program at the University of Chicago and subsequently developed and executed strategy at the seventh largest US bank, for his own publishing company, for an entire business group, for a large United Way, and at the American Fence Association. He is a certified strategic management professional and is past president of the Association for Strategic Planning. Lee created the Fast Track Strategic Planning System to streamline planning and make it less of a burden on the organization and the planning team. While Lee was ASP president, it updated the body of knowledge for strategic planning and strategic management, so he knows and uses best practices for planning and execution. His first book, which is available on Amazon, is called Ahead: Strategy is the Way to a Better Future, which aims to help business leaders understand the value of strategic planning and encourage them to plan. His second book, which is currently in draft, is called Big Decisions: Why We Make Them Poorly and How We Can Make Them Better, which recognizes that leaders, owners, and professionals make the key strategic decisions for their organizations and their future, and is devoted to equipping them to make better decisions. Lee, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Christy. I couldn't have written that better. Oh, wait, I did write it. It's a pleasure to talk to you about planning. I use this process with organizations and an abbreviated version of it with the people I coach. So this applies to you as a business person and or to your organization. Okay, and I'm taking the people I coach on a 3-month sprint, right? Where by the end of the year, they will have their plan for next year, their work plan as well. It'll be tied to their budget, and hopefully they're ready to go in 2022. So I'm going to take you through the process that I use with organizations and in abbreviated sense with individuals. Okay. All right, what are we going to talk about? A lot of things. Why to plan, good decisions, my planning model and process, what you need as input for planning, what a SWOT analysis is and how you use it, and that'll lead to creating a vision, to identifying gaps, to setting goals, objectives, and key performance indicators. And then from that, you create balanced strategies, and I'll explain what that means at the appropriate time. And then you've got the annual plan. What are you going to do in the next 12 months based on your vision and your strategies? And then plan implementation. Okay. Good news, the most used business tool globally is strategic planning. Bad news, just half of organizations use it. What's up with the rest of the world that they don't understand the value? Okay. And worse, of organizations with the plan, over 70% fail to implement it or poorly implement it. So you can do the math. That's like 20% of organizations have their act together in terms of creating a plan and then actually observing it, using it, living by it. And 60% of organizations don't link strategy and budgeting. Well, what's that about? You got a disconnect. You're not investing in that positive change you're trying to create. Okay, I could bore you with a lot of numbers. I'm not going to actually read this very much, but people who plan are twice as likely to survive. That's organizations, right? People who plan have increased sales. They tend to grow more than people who don't. And people who plan based on this massive meta-analysis have quantitative, good quantitative results and good qualitative results. So in my world, the book is closed, planning is beneficial. People who value planning tend to use planning best practices. So the reverse side of that is people who don't value planning but still plan don't use best practices. Well, that's a negative loop. That gets them nowhere or in a worse spot. And I can show you, I'm not going to read this to you, but these are a set of like a dozen best planning practices. And the blue line are the people who rate planning as important. And you can see to the extent to which they pursue the best practices. And the people who they plan, but they're not following best practices, they aren't as successful. Okay, Michael Porter, one of the gods of planning from Harvard, said strategy is about making choices, trade-offs. It's about deliberately choosing to be different. That's why I'm writing my second book, because I want people to be able to make smart choices. And the initial smart choice is we will plan, and then the second is, and we will implement. I'm after that 48% that don't plan and the 70% that do it poorly. Okay. 5 things that are important when you go into a planning mode. Don't just jump at whatever evidence is in front of you and say, oh, I understand. Collect more evidence. Think, maybe it doesn't mean this. Maybe it means something else. This might look like an opportunity, but what are the downsides to it? This might look like a threat, but how could we flip it and, you know, do something positive based on what initially looks like a negative change? Secondly, avoid groupthink. As a trained facilitator, I can tell you, if you're in a group and you're trying to reach a group decision, have people write down what they think and don't talk about it. Then come together as a group and talk about what people wrote down. If you do the reverse, everybody pays attention to the leader, to the loudest voice, to the whatever. Thirdly, when you're planning and in general decision-making, go wide. Well, we could do A or B. No, you could do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Brainstorm, come up with that big list. Then go through a process to narrow it. So the going wide avoids the false dilemma, which is, oh, we can only do A or B. And then narrowing avoids choice overload. How do I deal with 25 options? You go through a process to reduce them. Then you can go deep on the few options that look good and actually make a choice. Encourage others to challenge your thinking. People who think they're right are doing themselves a disservice if they don't say, well, what do you think, Tom? Do you agree? What do you see that I don't see? Right? Tim, what do you think? Right? And then finally, ignore sunk costs. What are sunk costs? That's everything that's come before. That's where I've invested my time, my energy, my money, my psyche. You can't do anything about that. You can't go back and undo the past. Look at opportunity costs. What's ahead of you? What's the best way to use my time, money, energy, invest my psyche? And if it means cutting the ropes on something that I'm deeply into, cut those ropes. Okay, my planning model is a classic gap planning model, which says that if you don't do anything intentional, things generally are going to get worse. Not always, but generally, because there's competition out there and there's things happening in the external environment that are driving change, and you've got to change along with that. So you take positive, intentional actions by positioning your organization, by pursuing strategies and tactics that push you to that vision of the future that you really want to live. So you set the vision out there and you do intentional things. And the difference between where you might go if you did nothing, if you continued as you have been continuing, and your vision is called the gap. Now, the gap is actually filled with a bunch of gaps or shortfalls, which we'll get into. By the way, if anybody has a question, please interrupt me because I'm just going to keep charging here if you don't. All right. A key point is planning is a process, not an event. You don't get a plan and put it on the shelf and say, well, we're good. Well, a lot of people do that, unfortunately. It's a process. It's a process of getting a vision, identifying the gaps between the vision and where you would go otherwise if you didn't pursue the vision, creating strategies to push you toward that vision, implementing and assessing how you're doing, and then periodically you're going through that circle again. Already mentioned my book. You can find it on Amazon. It's not a snorer, but neither is it, a romance novel. All right. Planning starts with external input, meaning you can't just sit around and say, well, should we do A or B or C? You need to understand, first of all, what your stakeholders see and what they expect of you or would like to see of you. Stakeholders depends on the kind of organization. For the chamber, it's the chamber members. It might be institutions that are important in the community that the chamber needs to work with. Fort Meade, for example. For someone with a financial planning practice, obviously would be clients. For a retail business, it obviously would be customers, but it might also be, if it's a local retailer, it might be people in local government who affect it, and so on. So identify your stakeholders and then use, you can use e-surveys. I'm a huge fan of e-surveys. You can go assemble groups and talk to groups to get input. And then you can do interviews. It depends on your situation, your bandwidth, how much of this you do. But ask the people who matter to your organization's success what they see and what they think you should do.
What happens if people don't reply?
Oh, it's like any surveying. You keep prompting them. And, in my case, my MBA taught me some things about surveying. I worked as a market research analyst. So, I'm looking for statistical validity, right? I mean, if I'm surveying 1,000 people and I get 300 to tell me something, that's fine. That's fine. For this purpose, maybe for other purposes, might not be enough, but usually you can sense a general sentiment. So the more widely shared something is, the more reliable it is.
How do you know how much response you're going to get from a survey? In other words,
You
are there
don't.
any guides for that? Because you send out 1,000. You're going to get 2 or you're going to get 500.
Well, yeah,
I mean, you need to make some intelligent decisions.
Right, right. That's why I like a layered method. I do the survey, I get whatever I get, and then I try to talk to people, right?
Okay.
Right.
Even if it's just 1 or 2.
Well, you'll get more than 1 or 2.
I know that.
Yeah, but another thing is keep the survey very short. I have clients who want to add all this stuff to the planning survey. No, I mean, we can add a question maybe, but the more you burden it, the more people will abandon and not take the survey, not complete it.
No.
So here's my baseline survey. I asked 7 questions, and I'm not going to read those to you. You can see them. But basically, I'm trying to understand strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as they see it, what opportunities they think the organization has, the most important things to begin doing now, and what's your vision of great success for us? Okay. And then do an environmental scan. And I have clients who have said to me, oh, we don't need one of those. And once I didn't do it and I regretted it. So I'm sorry, if you're not going to have me do an environmental scan for you, I'm not going to be your planning facilitator, because you need to know what's going on in the external world in terms of trends and forecasts that are potentially will affect your organization and give you create threats or give you opportunities, right? So basically, the way I do a scan, thank God for the internet. Doing scans in the old days was very arduous and difficult. Now, I just poke around on Google for about a day and come up with all these trends, all these forecasts. I categorize them and I feed them back to the client. These are just two different table of contents from scans. I've got scans where the table of contents is 2.5 pages. I didn't put that on. Depends on the client and the business. But, you know, for an arts center, we talked about trends in attendance and audience. We talked about the business model for not an arts center, it's actually the Annapolis Opera. We talked about the current state of opera. We looked at financial trends affecting opera companies. We looked at forecasts about opera companies. We looked at innovation in opera and some other stuff.
Before the pandemic or after?
This was before. Yeah, unfortunately, we did a whole plan for Maryland Hall, and they were starting to implement it that January, and then it's just, they're doing what they have to do, not implementing that strategic plan.
Yeah.
Okay, and then look internally at your business, at your organization. You know, just understand where you are financially for your capabilities or problems, where you're positioned in the market, sales, products, innovation, HR. Just try to understand key aspects of the organization. And I do that for my clients. Although sometimes they feed me documents that they've already done the work. But again, a third party, I should have said this up front, I don't care if it's me or not, get a third party to facilitate your planning, because anybody in the organization has biases. And I won't say the third party won't have biases, but they'll be less or different than someone in the organization who leads planning will have. So I do the business analysis, I do the environmental scan. Typically, we also do a competitive analysis. Not always, but I think this is useful. You know, where do you fit in the market, and what are your strengths and weaknesses versus the other people that you're competing with? So you know, that's baseline understanding. And then you do a SWOT analysis, which is where you put that all together. And I'll show you what goes into a SWOT in my world. I derive strengths from the interaction with stakeholders, from the business analysis and the competitive analysis. Same thing for weaknesses. Opportunities, it's the environmental scan, to some extent the competitive analysis, and the questions with the stakeholders. So that's where you populate the SWOT. And here's an example of a SWOT. By the way, I am showing you nonprofit generally examples, because my commercial clients, I'm not going to talk about them to the extent that it would be helpful for this presentation. But I do for-profit, nonprofit, association, government, done it all. Okay, so, you know, you can read this, but you can see this came out of all that input for Maryland Hall. Right? And these are ranked. And then, remember I said the survey, we said what's most important to begin and most important to achieve. So here's what we learned from stakeholders from the survey for Maryland Hall. Okay. Now you're ready to set your vision. And I get the question, well, what's the difference between a mission and a vision? And a mission is why we exist, what we do. It's a what is statement. A vision is what we can be, where we want to go, what we believe about the future, and how it will help us achieve or build on our mission. Missions are useful and important, and sometimes we'll revisit them, but they are most often just left in place, unless you're fundamentally changing the organization. Okay, so what is a vision? It's an inspiring, hopefully compelling, hopefully revelation of what the future success of the organization can bring, which the people involved in the planning share, and hopefully even outside of the planning room, and by which they are guided. So a vision is that benchmark you use to decide what to do and what not to do. That God of planning from Harvard says the most fundamental purpose of planning is to help you decide what not to do. Because otherwise, as I see so much, especially with my coaching clients, you're chasing all these shiny objects and they look interesting, but they're not necessarily going to get you down the road to where you want to be. Okay. So think of that shining city on a hill where you want to go. And so it enables every possible action you could take to be evaluated. How will this get us there? Is it contributory? Is it better than the other things we could do or not? And it really guides directional changes and investments. So I could read you all these attributes of a vision. I'll let you look at them. Then I'm going to show you a few short examples. Sometimes vision statements get very long. I try and have my clients shorten them up, but hey, if it turns them on to have a lot of words and they're understandable, that's fine. But, oh, I'm going to show you in a moment. Here's a cool thing, that the people who are more successful because of strategic plan have I'll use an old business term, a BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. They've got a big vision. You know, it's not mealy mouth, it's not little, it's big. And why is that? Well, it forces the organization to stretch, to really try new things, you know, to go after it. So don't settle. So here are 4 very short visions. Ben and Jerry's, making the best possible ice cream in the nicest possible way. What a great vision. And Nike, bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete. And there's a footnote on it. We believe every human is an athlete. To establish Starbucks as the most recognized and respected brand in the world. Well, there's no humility in that. Yeah, but you know, you can see how that would motivate Starbucks to do certain things and not to do other things. And then Boeing, which of course has had its problems, best in aerospace and enduring global industrial champion. I mean, it's a great vision. I'm just not convinced. I'm a Chicago guy, so I know Boeing very well. I've got problems. Anyway. Okay. So I'm going to take you through the exercises that I do with planning teams to create these things. So I ask the question, if you or your organization, if it's you, we're talking about you as a business person, or your organization could aspire to be the best you or it can be, the best of class, the leader, what would characterize you or that organization? And this is where each person writes their own list, right? And they don't talk about it. So I'm standing around for 10 minutes, just looking at my phone while they're doing it. And then, in doing it, some things you could consider, stakeholders you'd serve and their expectations, the basis on which you'd compete. All right, you have to make a choice. You cannot be all things to all people. You can't be the low-cost leader, love your customers to death so they know that, and have the best services or products. You actually have to choose which of those you're going to emphasize and push hardest on that, and then meet minimum acceptable standards or what you can achieve on the other side of things. So given that, how would that affect your vision? The services you could offer or the products you could create, the assets and strengths you can build on, the opportunities and trends we can leverage. Now you can see why having that SWOT analysis is helpful, because they've got it right in front of them. And then, as a group, you'd process on them, and you'd select the elements for the shared vision of future success as a group. And then there's something that a facilitator's trick called N3 voting, which means if you got a list of 30 things that you could choose from, you give people 10 votes, right? N divided by 3. And I use, if I'm doing this live, I've got all those 30 things on sheets on the wall, and everybody gets 10 dots. And I say, you can only vote the maximum of 3 for any one item. So you've got to distribute, so you've got to distribute your dots out, and you can see very quickly the sentiment in the room. So then you list those highest vote ones, and you're not going to do a final draft at that point. It's a waste of people's time to wordsmith in a meeting, but you've got the sentiment there. You've got the rough vision there. So actually, the next step after you've selected those elements is you have people individually draft their version of that vision statement, and you share those and discuss them, and you decide which one is the best, or ones are the best. You can use N3 voting again to finally hone in on better wording or better combination of elements, but edit it later. Okay, then you've got strategic gaps. So what is a gap? That's the variances. Those are the variances between the future that the vision holds out and where you're headed, and will most likely wind up without doing something. So I love this example. When Elon Musk formed Tesla, his vision was, and I assume still is, accelerate the advent of sustainable transport by bringing mass market electric cars to market as soon as possible. Well, what kind of gaps did he have? He didn't have a factory. Batteries weren't powerful enough. He didn't have engineers. He didn't have funding. He didn't have a dealer network. He didn't have a brand identity. And the car he could make at that point would be so expensive, he wouldn't sell many. Well, guess what? He overcame all of those gaps. Pretty cool. Pretty cool.
There are a lot of testers on the road.
Well, there are. And, we can argue about strategic mistakes and, the self-driving and all, but, from a strategist standpoint, this guy had it together. It still does. So how do you identify gaps? Where's the organization now? Where's it headed at the moment? What's the best guess where it actually wind up at the end of the planning horizon without intentional actions? And then what are the major variances between that likely destination and the future? And you can look at market presence, products and services, technology, people, leadership, et cetera, to think of gaps, right? So in this case, I mean, you could have people write them down individually, but in this case, I use a different technique, small groups. You know, get together 3, 4, 5 people and have them brainstorm gaps, and then bring the groups back together. And you list them out. In the group, you also want them to figure out, well, okay, if the gap is lack of funds, what could we do to get funds, right? So they brainstorm an answer or a response. And then you put that on the wall, and you could see where the gap is inhibiting reaching the vision. This was for a community in Illinois, and not expanding. I'm trying to read one of these that might be easily understood. If the vision set a mix of businesses in thriving downtown and in commercial corridors, well, the village doesn't control the real estate, so they can only influence what lands there. So then the question would be, how can we influence the kind of businesses that show up and occupy our business area, right? Okay, and so you'd review the gaps, add what gaps might be missing, and then as a group, you look at the remedies. So you find the most important gaps, and you look at the suggested remedies. So here for the opera, a gap was marketing. They weren't very good marketers, so they've got to add institutional and program expertise, so on. Lack of diversity in audience and size, new programming, take the opera on the road, add other kinds of performances, right? That then brings you to strategies. What, I'm missing a word in there. What powerful strategies can you pursue in the next 5 years? Now, could be 4 years, could be 3 years. You have to set a planning horizon. I tend to work with 4 to 5 years. So what strategies can you use to close those gaps and move you toward that shared vision? So strategies are specific, high impact activities. They encompass the long-term plan of action designed to achieve a set of goals and objectives under conditions of uncertainty. It's just like decision making. You're never going to know enough to be certain. You're always approximating. You're always predicting. Well, we think this is the best thing to do, but there's always uncertainty. So get over it. You'll never know 100% what the right thing to do is. I'm not going to read this list about what effective strategies are. I'll let you look at it for a moment. Okay. So here's some examples of strategies. I'm giving you a lot of them. Hyatt has 3. Now, this is something I want you to think about, that you've got some huge organizations that are driven by like 3 strategies. I have people who want to write 8, 10 strategies, and I say, no, don't do that. It's too complicated. Anyway. So, and I also want to point out that the actual strategy are the bolded words up front. The following words explain it, or talk about techniques, or how we're going to do it, right? Here's Levi's. 4. HP, a lot of words, but only 3 strategies. It's all explaining Ethan Allen, 5 strategies. Trex Company, I used to run the American Defense Association, so I know Trex well, a good Virginia company. 5 strategies. Wouldn't want any more. Again, you can see the labels up front really describe it. McDonald's, 3. Maximize our marketing, commit to the core, double down on the 3 Ds. I mean, again, I'm a Chicago guy. I worked across the street for McDonald's for 8 years. They've got it together. You can't run the largest restaurant business in the world and not be doing something right. Even though I personally don't eat there anymore. But ASICs, being a runner, I like to put this one up. But again, really short strategies. Win in performance running, develop digital as a new growth driver, expand Onitsuka Tiger, it's their clothing line, and expand our growth markets. Pretty simple. MasterCard, a lot of words. But grow, diversify, build, work with strategic partners, and internally develop talent and culture. It's a lot simpler than it reads. Okay, I'll give you a couple that I worked with. This was the operas. They made me put down 5. That's okay, I had no trouble with that. And here is a counseling center I worked with. And here's a government relations firm up in Boston that I worked with. Just 4. Okay. I'm spending time on this because the strategies are really the crux of a good plan. I mean, you have to execute it, but you got to get the strategies right. So when I work with a business person, an entrepreneur, an owner, a leader, we go through somewhat the same exercise. It's abbreviated, but here's a young accountant. The vision is not as polished as you would see for an organization. That was his vision. And then he had 5 strategies, and I kind of forced him to do it based on a balanced scorecard type model, which I'll show you in a moment. Very simple. Okay, so for strategies, write down the strategy ideas, don't talk about it, look at the vision and the remedies to the gaps for ideas, and then as a group, okay, Tom, you give us the top one on your list, and then the next one, you go around the table, you put them up, and people will start to repeat themselves and say, okay, thanks, we've got, 30 strategy ideas on the walls. So let's talk about them. Oh, this is the same as this. You combine them. Isn't that really a tactic and not a strategy? Let's get rid of that one. So you're winnowing down the list that way. And then you come up with what we call strategy themes and goals, right? A theme identifies the strategic area that the related strategy or strategies will address, like people. And the goal sets the objective that the strategies under the theme aim to achieve. So here is an example from that counseling center. The themes were facilities, people, admin, marketing, and services. And the goals were excellent welcoming facilities in appropriate locations, caring counselors, who, as you can see, right? So then as the group, you would group the strategy ideas under the themes and goals, right? Oops. I want to introduce the balanced scorecard here. Those Harvard people came up with this in the 1990s. And strategies way back when used to be mostly financial. And they made the compelling case that financial results are achieved by having good people, a good culture, by having good business processes, and production and delivery, and by serving the needs of customers or clients or members. So the idea is that you need strategies that bridge these areas or that address them. So you'd look at the strategies you're working on, see if they're balanced. You'd look at the themes and make sure you're kind of covering across the balanced scorecard. You might affirm, rename, combine, or eliminate themes. And at this point, I want to introduce SMART goals. You've probably heard of them. A SMART goal is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. And so you'd write a goal for each theme, and then you'd rank them through that, voting, and you'd come up with a goal. And then you'd also try to winnow out strategy ideas that weren't really strategies. They were tactics. And, you'd wrap it up, and eventually you'd reduce things to the top 3 to 5 strategies to pursue. And so here's an example for Maryland Hall. I do a 1-page plan for people as a way they can see it all in one place. You can see the vision, the mission. You can see they had 6. I couldn't get them to 5. The 6 themes. You can see the goals for each one. And then you can see the strategies. How are they going to make it happen? Okay, I got to keep plowing ahead here. We're almost done. And here's the opera. Same thing. 5 themes, 5 goals, 5 strategies. Okay. This is something that only a subset of planning consultants do. And luckily, when I was involved with the Association for Strategic Planning and Leadership, I got to do a very deep dive on best planning practices. And what you want to do is fish out of your goals, your strategic objectives, meaning what are those little pieces of things that actually are intentional strategic actions. So for the counseling center, the pieces were welcoming facilities, convenient locations, caring counselors. Okay, that goes under the client stakeholder marketing part of the balanced scorecard. Effective systems, improve professional operations. That goes under the process part of the balanced scorecard. Organizational capabilities, qualified counselors, counselors who meet diverse needs, etc. And then the financial resources, funding, etc. So we fished out the strategic objectives, did it by the scorecard, and then we also looked at, well, how could we measure how we're doing in those areas? So that is where KPIs come in, key performance indicators. And you can see now on the full spreadsheet here, we have the KPIs that could be used, hopefully were used for each objective, and we set targets. So this goes to the implementation part. And it also allows you, if you want to go that far, to do a logic model, which shows how having ADA compliant spaces and qualified counselors and so on, and then adding process to it, and then coming up with the resources will allow you then to serve those clients and to be known and connected in the community and to improve community mental health. That's a logic model. And it's used more in nonprofit planning, but I try to use it with my commercial clients as well. So then you're down to setting your initiatives and action steps. A lot of words there. these are tactics that result in focused, coordinated effort. An initiative is something that maybe would span years or sum up a lot of individual actions you could take. So here is one way they could fit together. You've got a vision. Below that, you've got your strategic goals. And then I'm just showing it for one of the strategic goals. You've got, in this case, 2 strategies. And then to get down the road on one strategy, you're setting up a couple of initiatives, and they've got action steps within them. And then you're going to measure at the end how you're doing on that. So that's how things fall together. And then, so here's an example. Infrastructure, this is for that community in Illinois. Prioritize the village's needed infrastructure investments. That's one action step. And the other one is explore long-term financing options for infrastructure improvement. Or for Maryland Hall, the guest experience was one of the strategies. So identify your guest touch points, map the guest experience from arrival to departure, identify gaps, set levels of excellence for each touch point, and then train your volunteers and staff to give a radical welcome and ensure that guests have a safe experience. So that's how it falls together. For an individual, it's the same thing. Once you get down below the first 3 items, you can see for the 12-month period what that coaching client, what we've set up, at least part of it, for his action step, tactics, initiatives over that 12-month period. Okay, I'm not going to read all this to you because we're almost done, so don't worry about that. Okay, so brainstorming, the action steps, combining similar actions and initiatives, use N3 multi-voting to come up with what you think you really want to do. And then after the dust settles, a small team edits it and says, I don't know what we were smoking, we can't do that, but what about this? And then, you know, if it's like it gets accepted in some fashion or another. Okay, hang on. So it's important that somebody is responsible for each action step. That means they need to make sure it happens. They might be doing the work, but at the least, they need to make sure it happens. And a timeline should be set against it. When will this happen? And how are we going to measure progress, right? So here's an example from those same strategies we looked at before. Who's the responsibility assigned to? A little broad in the village setting, unfortunately. It really didn't fall to all those people. And then what's the timeline, right? And then, if you want to be overwhelmed, you know, there's a thick written plan, but I want to reduce it to 1 page that somebody could tack on their bulletin board or their wall or whatever. And here's the Maryland Hall plan. It's all put together. And you can see how the objectives map against the balanced scorecard and map against the KPIs and map against the strategy map or the logic model, as it's also called. And then on the lower right, for each strategy, you've got the action steps, who's responsible, and a timeline, all in one sheet. I don't know if you could do this for McDonald's. I think you could, actually. Implementation, where it all falls apart. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Measure. Track. Have a separate set of meetings scheduled to address how are we doing on our plan. Don't put it in your staff meeting or whatever, because it'll get lost. The urgent always overrules the important, right? And set dates for when are we going to assess how we're doing, when are we going to replan, because even if you don't change your strategies, you ought to at least look at them, you're going to need another 12 months of action steps to get further down the road to that vision. And if you want to be anal, you set up a dashboard like I have to track. This is a wrap-up dashboard to track how I'm doing on each of my strategies. And there's a set of action steps under each one. And this was early in the year, so it shows how much work I still have to do. And why does a strategy get not executed or blocked? Lack of leadership that's committed to organizational change. Lack of wide organizational involvement in strategy development. If you got any question whether someone should be in the room when you're developing strategy, bring them into the room. Obviously, if you have 100 people, it gets a little unwieldy, but I've dealt with planning teams of 30 people. You can make it work. You get more commitment the wider you go, because they feel like they're part of the solution, right? They came up with it. Unclear strategies, unrealistic strategies, accountability and responsibility for strategy execution not assigned, lack of an effective process for strategy implementation. Are they using action steps, tactics, timelines, metrics, milestones, annual reporting and adjustment? And as I said before, the urgent trumping paying sufficient attention to strategy execution. So 2 things you can do when you've got your plan together: do a postmortem. You know what do a pre-mortem. Now that's an error. I don't know why I didn't catch that. You know what a postmortem is. Why did the patient die? Okay, in a pre-mortem, you can say, let's pretend like this didn't work. What could have gone wrong? And what could we do now to remedy that or, lower that risk? And then the other one is related, scenario planning. So, if I were in California and I had a California company, I would have a scenario plan based on the large earthquake, right? What would that do to our plan and our business? Okay, let's see what we can do now so we avoid, mitigate, or recover from whatever these bad events are, right? Okay, this is my hype. If you're interested in planning, I'm here to help. Come see me. Very simple. That's it. Questions? I know we've got all of 2 minutes left.
I'm going to have you stop sharing.
I can stop sharing.
And then we'll put everyone up on.
Oh, there's nice people out there.
Yeah.
Including Linda and Laura, who I know very well.
Great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Did I put you all to sleep or stun you or any questions?
I will ask, what is the biggest kind of systemic issue or obstacle that you see for many organizations? Like what's the one that you see kind of occurring over and over again? That's probably a better way to say that.
It's power and authority.
Thank you.
Meaning the people at the top or person at the top has, even if the person recognizes it, has undue influence over what happens or doesn't happen. Sometimes I want to kick the CEO out of the room because even though I'm facilitating, people are curating their thoughts based on that person and the authority. But as a facilitator, I'm pretty good beforehand, making sure that the boss understands what the issue is and then in the sessions, making sure I am eliciting comments from a lot of other people and maybe even ignoring the boss, right? Great question, Laura. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Appreciate it. Kim, Christy, you're muted.
Thank you. You'd think I'd remember that by now with all these Zoom meetings. But well, if there's no other questions for Lee, I just want to thank you all for joining us today. This has been such an informative session. I was taking lots of notes for our planning for next year. So thank you, Lee. We did record the session, and we will send all the attendees a link following the event in case you'd like to review what you learned as you start to curate your plan for 2022. We do hope that you'll tune in for our future webinars and our events. The full schedule can be found on our website, which is www.centralmarylandchamber.org. And just a few upcoming events I wanted to mention. On Thursday evening, we'll be participating in the Multi-Chamber Fall Bash at Walden Country Club. So if you're ready to get out and do some networking, it will be outdoor. That is Thursday night. And then on October 20th, we're having a small business seminar just like this on multi-channel marketing. And then on October 21st, we're hosting a coffee catch-up in-person morning networking event at Wheels Skating Center. And please save the date for our big economic outlook event, which is November 3rd at the Jockey Club at Laurel Park. So once again, I just want to thank you, Lee, with Forest Consulting for such a great presentation. And I encourage all our guests to reach out to him to schedule a one-on-one if you have further questions or if you think of something in the middle of the night you forgot to ask him. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Christy. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Christy.